Hello, I'm Dean Martin with Transmission Digest. Welcome to the TranStar Industry Studios here at Babcock's Media.
Transmission technicians have always needed to adapt to new transmission architectures. This is certainly applied to step-type transmissions, not so much to CVTs, which is continuously variable transmission. Today, again, here with me is Anthony Tosi.
Hello.
Of Transcolonial Auto Service, and together we're going to try to demystify what a CVT is. Are you ready to do this?
I'm ready, Mike.
Okay. Basically, a CVT is somewhat like a snowmobile transmission or a centrifugal clutch on a go-kart. The concept of a CVT actually originated about 500 years ago with Leonardo da Vinci. However, the first practical automotive application didn't occur until the late 50s. A person named Hub Van Doorn actually designed a CVT, and a company called DAF produced it. They were situated in the Netherlands, and the early CVT actually had a rubber belt with steel cleats, so you imagine that the torque capacity was not that high. But they used this for several years. In the States, the first production transmission, CVT transmission to hit, was the Subaru Justy. And that was short-lived. The durability was not that great. However, in 1996, Honda released the Civic HX with a CVT, and over the years, they've been refining and utilizing that transmission in more and more models, including hybrids. Beyond Honda, at the turn of the century, Audi actually ended up producing the 01J. They used several models of the Audi line, and ZF even took a swipe at it with the Mini, and a little bit later on, the Ford 500, which I think came out in 2005. That was short-lived. ZF decided CVTs were not for them, so they sold the division. Globally, Toyota has produced several different models of CVTs, but again, not a lot in the States. Without question, when it comes to CVTs, the king of the hill is Jatco. Jatco now represents over 50% of the business. They have produced over 40 million CVTs since 1997. So their CVTs go in a wide range of vehicles, small and large. We've actually put a list together with all the models that we've come up with today. What we have here is a JF 017E. In fact, this is courtesy of TranStar Industries. I'd like to thank them for the use of their transmission. It's a JF 017E, but this is actually under a group name CVT8. In later years, Jatco started to group name these transmissions. CVT7, which is a transmission that actually is a two-speed CVT, or a CVT8 like we have here. And CVT8s could be a JF 016E, 17E, or 18 or 19E, which those are hybrids. Looking at this transmission, it just appears like a normal front-wheel drive automatic. Externally, there are different bell housing configurations. You got a normal MLPS. This happens to take a torque converter because some CVTs won't even take a converter. And again, they use them in hybrids as well. But looking on that side, you can see that there is a warmer. You want to point that warmer out. Just like what Honda uses, as well as they have it's a cooler return filter that can be replaced externally. There are 3 sensors, RPM sensors on this transmission. You have basically an input, a primary, and an output. This is an electrical connector, just like any transmission would have. And of course, the transmission has the serial number, the model numbers on it, and you can reference to see what model you have. This is the end cover, and there are 6 bolts that actually bolt to the back of the variators or the pulleys. These 6 bolts actually have O-rings on them. When we disassemble this CVT, we can peel this from the front side or the back side. Today we're going to take the front end apart first, kind of get rid of some of the weight, and then we'll take the back side apart. We're actually going to pull the variators out with the cover, although we could take the bolts out and pull the cover first and then the variators. Depending on model, again, not all CVTs, even Jatcos, are the same. How they come apart, how they go together, are going to be model specific. So again, this is a CVT-8. This also has a lot of pressure taps. If you hook up a pressure gauge, make sure it's a 1,000-pound gauge, because these transmissions routinely run 700 or 800 PSI. So you can't just use a 100 or 300 PSI gauge, or you'll have oil all over the place.
And a broken gauge.
And a broken gauge. So this happens to be an all-wheel drive, goes into a Murano. This happened to be an all-wheel drive, but you know, 2-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, not really an issue. So our one word about the sensors. Some of these RPM sensors might have a spacer underneath. Make sure they go back in, or you will eat a sensor. They control the depth of it and the air gap of the sensor. So you can think of anything else?
Not right now.
Okay, well, we're going to peel this down, hopefully not have a lot of problem, and we'll cover each component as we go. We've kind of cobbled this thing a little bit, so we're not taking out a whole lot of bolts. I'm going to Okay, that's it.
Just 2.
Okay, I'm going to kind of tilt this back just a little bit. Okay. Again, because of tapered bearings, this transmission just uses a silicone sealer. So you don't really have gaskets other than the pan gasket. You need a screwdriver. And of course, these dowel pins can be a little sticky. Let's look at this thing first. Yeah, so always be aware of what has to be siliconed. With the bell housing out of the way, you can see we have just a normal differential like any step-type transmission. We have an idler gear, the output or drive gear. This transmission happens to have an off-access or remote access pump. Some CVTs actually have a direct drive pump, so it depends on model, which one you have. Anthony, you want to pull that cooler filter. Again, this has a cooler return filter. It's always a good idea to replace that. And you'll have different types of seals. Make sure that they get replaced as well. Just to get rid of some weight, we're going to take some of this off. And of course, preload is real important on all these components. So always make sure if anything gets changed that preload is verified to make sure you don't smoke the transmission. Again, this is the driven variator, which has the output gear with it. And there are shrouds. And this transmission is basically like the REO F10A, and it's just an improved version of it. So if anybody that's done that model, they'll be real familiar with this. There's a lot of shrouds to try to cut down cavitation, and again, we've cobbled this just a little bit. There is a snap ring that actually holds the pump drive gear to the pump shaft, and we're going to take this shroud out of the way. And again, this snap ring, which holds the pump gear to the shaft, you have to go down in between the notches to be able to get to this snap ring to spread it, to be able to get it off of the pump. One word about the pump drive gear. A lot of these gears, like on General Motors, are the same. They can be flipped. This one is offset. You have to put it back in the right way or you will have problems. So make sure that this gear goes back in with the step up. And again, you have just a normal washer. This is another baffle to try to cut down cavitation. I'm going to pull the O-ring off the input shaft. This has a normal walk-up O-ring, again, like any other transmission would have. Just make sure you put it on. Because this pump actually runs such high pressure, there's an extra brace here that goes from the stator support to the pump body. And they want to cut down the cavitation so much that they actually put rubber ribs around the shroud to make sure that the oil is channeled correctly. The stator support, again, there's no gasket underneath of it, but there's been a couple of design changes on this particular model that has to do with the back side of the stator support and the bearing. This one actually has a small bearing down inside. Type 2 actually has a large bearing that goes on the back side of the cover, and the depth of the cover is also longer. On this particular transmission, again, you have your input speed sensor, which goes against a tone ring or reluctor. Always make sure that you are careful with this so it doesn't get damaged. Anthony, you want to go ahead and pop the clutch apart. And again, there's a bearing. On this transmission, the pump is actually held in with some Allen head bolts. And normally you would pull the pan to pull the filter out to be able to get the pump. We've, again, cobbled this a little bit for illustration purposes, and we'll see if it'll come out. But again, for some reason, they used Allen head bolts instead. And this pump actually has a bolt that goes in from the back side. And again, like with the pulley bolts, this bolt that goes in on the back side has an O-ring. Make sure that the O-ring gets put on or you will have a leak from it. And again, normally we wouldn't be able to do this without pulling the filter out. But again, this is a normal, you want to pop these bolts out. This is a normal vane type pump that you would find in a lot of newer transmissions. So again, when you deal with these type of pumps, always make sure that the end plate and the slide gets reassembled the right way, because they can be flipped. So always mark which way they come out and replace any O-rings. These have a couple of O-rings down inside. But again, it's like a normal off-axis pump on any other transmission. And we have a clutch hub for the forward clutch, the sun gear, the planetary, which again you can see is just a simple planetary, and the internal gear, which was in the clutch assembly. And the clutches are just normal clutches, not anything special. And in the case, you have the reverse clutch. Again, just like any other reverse clutch. So what you're left with now is basically the drive and driven or primary secondary pulley, which we're now going to have to flip around to the backside and take out. So we're going to pick this up on part 2, so stay tuned.